they create something called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency within the Department of Homeland Security to supposedly protect the media environment from foreign influence. They create something called the Foreign Influence Task Force with the FBI that Trump was viewed by the deep state, by CIA, FBI, Pentagon,
NSA,
and all of the elites. And you're right, it's bipartisan in the sense that it's both never Trump Republicans and Democrats. What freaked them out the most about Trump is that he was threatening to pull the U.S. out of NATO. I don't think that was. I just think that was bluster. Like, that's insane. Like, and by the way, I should say, I support what we call the Western Alliance. I support providing military security for our allies in Asia and in Europe. I'm not there's parts of economic nationalism that I respect, but I don't think we should pull out of NATO. I think NATO has provided peace in the world and mostly been a good thing. It's obviously had some crazy abuses like Iraq. This whole experience has made me rethink my support for Ukraine. But I think it's important to understand that Trump terrified the deep state and the national security establishment. So did Brexit. There's a sense in which you had a guy on here named Peter Zeihan who wrote this book called this really apocalyptic book about how the world is going to fall apart. And his whole argument, which I don't agree with, I think he's brilliant, but I think the argument's wrong. His whole argument is based on the idea that the United States is going to stop providing military security to our allies in Asia and Europe. It's all just based on this assumption that Trump is the beginning of the U.S. withdrawing from its traditional role since World War II. There's a bunch of people who obviously their ideology, their livelihoods, their identity, just their whole way of life is tied up with the United States providing this protection for Europe and Asia, and they viewed Trump as threatening that. I also think they just really hated the guy. They looked down on him. He was crude and all the things that people don't like about him.
And he spoke disparagingly about the intelligence community.
Yeah. I mean,
which is crazy.
Absolutely. He was against the war in Iraq. He was different. He was a nationalist Republican. And what's so interesting is that, if you read people like, people on the left, like Noam Chomsky and others who have been critics of U.S. or Glenn Greenwald, who are critics of, and I think Matt Taibbi, critics of U.S. government, military invasions around the world since World War II. I mean, we've overthrown many governments, right? Iran, Chile, Guatemala, what the pattern is that these are places where nationalists, sometimes socialists, but often just nationalists who are trying to control their economies and they didn't want foreign interference, were coming to power. And the U.S. government would see that as a threat to providing, to having this liberal global order, as it's called. They saw Trump as an existential threat to this post-war liberal order, and they needed to. They viewed social media as the means to his power, which I think was exaggerated. So on the one hand, they saw a threat. I think they also saw an opportunity. The war on terror, we won. I mean, huge victory. I mean, it's shocking how successful it was in some ways. So you have a bunch of people that suddenly need something to do. So there's a lot of motivations there. And then you also have the guys that lost the Hillary campaign. John Podesta, he was her chair of her campaign. He runs the most powerful, progressive, frankly, propaganda organization in the world, or at least in the United States, the Center for American Progress. They were looking also for some reason, someone to blame for their own failures, for the dislikability of Hillary. And so there was just a lot of motivations to try to get control over social media platforms. They felt like they had lost control of them. The internet itself is created by the U.S. Department of Defense, and Google is a spinoff of Defense Department projects. So on the one hand, the internet is a function of the U.S. military. I mean, it's a spinoff of the U.S. military. It's a great one. We're glad to have it. But I think the U.S. military and the deep state and whatever, they felt like they had control over the internet until Trump, basically, or really maybe until ISIS around 2014, 2015. That's the first dynamic. The second dynamic is culturally, Silicon Valley is libertarian, right? So you have the Electronic Frontier Foundation. You have a libertarian ethos. Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, is very much a manifestation of that libertarian ethos. Mark Zuckerberg less. But even Mark Zuckerberg, after the 2016 elections, when everyone's accusing him of throwing the election to Trump, he's like, this is ridiculous. He's like, our own data doesn't support. There just wasn't enough. The Russians clearly did not have this influence. They just beat the crap out of him so much and threatened to take away their ability to operate, which is known as Section 230, which is this huge liability protection in the law that passed in 1996, which allows Google, Facebook, Twitter to exist.
Well, there was certainly evidence of like these troll farms.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, we know they exist.
Yes. Yeah, but it's trivial.
Yeah.
I mean, they would exaggerate. They would say things like, 146 million Americans had Russian propaganda in their news feeds. That's not the same as saying 146 million people saw the ads.
Right.
Because it's like your feed is, remember, that was social.
Of course.
Facebook has changed. So, yeah, I mean, there's three big disinformation campaigns that were run by, frankly, the U.S. government and their allies. The first was the Russia hoax, the idea that Russians controlled Donald Trump and won him the election. The second was the Hunter Biden laptop, and the third is that COVID the idea that it's a conspiracy theory to even imagine that COVID could have emerged from a lab. There's others, including, we can talk about. There was this effort to basically smear a bunch of ordinary conservative or Trump supporting Twitter users as Russian bots.
Yeah.
But basically, you have active disinformation campaigns being run by the U.S. government and U.S. government contractors against the American people on these issues at the same time that they're demanding censorship. So you have propaganda on the one hand and censorship on the other.
Well, in step one, the Hunter Biden laptop, for example one rather, the Hunter Biden laptop, no one's in trouble. Right?
No.
No one's in trouble. No one from the FBI is in trouble. No one loses their job.
No.
No one gets reprimanded. No one gets, brought before the American people and said, you failed us. Not only did you fail us, you betrayed us because you knew this was not true. And you allowed someone whose son has deep ties to both Ukrainian and Chinese companies that were paying him for influence. And it appears, at least by some of these emails, that some of that money went to the actual vice president of the United States, which is fucking wild.
Yes.
That no one is and then the crazy thing is, one of the things about having a right and a left is that whenever there's information that's inconveniently bad for that one side, particularly the left, you don't hear a fucking peep about it on the media.
Right.
It's dismissed. It's like, they'll talk about it like someone said someone talked about the Hunter Biden laptop and said it was like half fake. That was like a term. AOC. Half fake. That's right. That is such a horrible violation of the trust that the people who elected you put in you. You have access to all the information. You have access to that actual fucking laptop.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, I have access to it too.
Yeah.
A lot of people have access to it. If you wanted to. I said I don't want to look at it. I was like, I don't want to look at that fucking thing. I don't want to see this guy getting foot jobs from hookers in Vietnam, smoking street crack. It's crazy.